Hello and welcome to game number 3 from the World Chess Championship in London 2018 between the American Hope Fabiano Caruana, who has the white pieces in this game, and the defending champion Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces. Magnus hails from Norway, and they clock in at a very evenly matched ratings. Caruana with 28-32 and Carlsen with 28-35. It's only 3 points. Has never been this small a difference between players in a World Championship match. Let's just dive into the game. Caruana with white, and just like in game 1, he opened with pawn to e4. To be expected, has been his main move, as we have mentioned. But now, to me, a slight surprise by Carlsen playing c5. I thought he would go back to e5, and c5 in the first game was sort of a bluff, like he did in the first World Championship match that he played against Anand, when he played the Caro-Kann in the first game with black, but then went to his tried and trusted e5, which has been his main weapon in World Championship matches. After knight f3, knight c6, I was sort of hoping for and expecting maybe d4, the open Sicilian, which Caruana did not opt for. This happens after d4, and after takes, most likely Carlsen would have gone for the Sveshnikov, which is this line, a very theoretical line. But he went for the Rossolimo again with bishop to b5. Now Carlsen saw no reason to switch things up, so he played g6 here, repeating the first game, d takes c6. And yeah, I want to mention something here which I didn't mention in the first game, that we're kind of taught to capture towards the center, like b takes c6. But just like in the exchange for Lopez, d takes c6 is the more common move, and developing the pieces, and in this case the light squared bishops, takes precedence over pawn structure. The pawn structure is still solid, but as a general rule, we do capture towards the center, but there are exceptions to most rules in chess, and this is one of them. Okay, we do repeat game 1 with d3, bishop to g7, and in game 1, Caruana played h3, but in this one he played castles, so the first deviation here. And yeah, here Carlsen played a rare move. The most common move here is indicated by the yellow arrow, to play the knight to f6, and from there usually it goes to d7 for this maneuver that we mentioned already in game 1. e5 is also a common move, but he did play queen to c7 here, which surprised many people. I think Krishik said he didn't really understand it. Okay, that's a very high class waiting move, I don't understand. Much more calm Russian voice, can't do it. But yeah, I mean, b6 looks like a more more logical waiting move, because you don't really damage your position in any way. b6 is usually played anyway. Well, queen c7, it's not completely clear what the idea of the move is. Perhaps to keep an eye on the e5 pawn in some lines. But okay, rook e1 by Caruana, and well, if black does nothing, maybe we can push e5 ourselves and play against this knight here on g8. So Carlsen played e5. Now in the first game, Caruana played f4, as indicated by the green arrow. But now with the rook on e1, this plan makes less sense. So in this game, Caruana went with a3, seeking play on the queen side. Now hang on a minute, does he want to play b4? Yes, he wants to do that, but why does he want to open up the position? Well, we were also taught that the side with the bishop pair wants to open up the position, but like I said, there are exceptions to rules, and in this case, white wants to open up the position with b4 because it will speed up his development. He's slightly ahead in development. The black king is still in the center of the board, nothing too critical yet, but a3, b4 is a well-established plan in these kind of positions. So okay, play went on with knight to f6, and now b4 by Caruana, very consistent. Carlsen castled, and this does offer up a pawn sacrifice, although probably a temporary one. Caruana did not accept. He played knight b to d2, but black should be very quick to regain this pawn. If he's worried, he can play queen to e7, then perhaps move the knight to d7, and you already have two attackers on this pawn, which should drop quite quickly. So Caruana didn't think about this. He played knight b to d2, and now bishop g4, which turns out to be the first new move of the game. Previously there was a game between 2,400 players, Kai Sauri and Kramling, D. Kramling, not Pia Kramling, which is a famous female grandmaster. This was played in Boras in 1979. C takes b4 is actually what the computer wants to play, and gives preference to c takes b4 over the move played by Carlsen, which was bishop to g4. But Carlsen's idea is that, well, he doesn't really see, even though he has the bishop pair, he doesn't really see a big time role for his light squared bishop in the position, so he likes to get rid of it. We can see like these pawns sort of play against the bishop. They cover squares that the bishop can go to, so it's not easy for the bishop to find targets, so Carlsen elects to get rid of it. h3 now, questioning the bishop, and once you say A, you have to say B, so we kind of have to take on f3. And now there are choices. I think Swidler preferred queen takes f3, but Caruana played knight takes f3. And now Carlsen took on b4. So this position should be slightly more comfortable for white. I mean, he has more dynamic in his position. He can put his bishop on b2, press the e5 pawn. He can put the bishop on e3 as well. He already has some pressure on the a file. You can in some cases push c4, c5, then maneuver your knight to c4 and eye this square. So plenty of ideas for white. And probably Carlsen didn't want to allow his opponent a free hand here, and started to exchange stuff off here with a5. This also concedes the initiative a little bit to white, but okay, he gets some pieces off. B takes a5, rook takes on a5, and now bishop d2 was played by Caruana. Rook takes a5 was also quite logical. Then you attack the queen with bishop d2. The queen has to retreat to c7 to keep an eye on the pawn, which was attacked by this knight. And now queen a1, using the geometry of the board, attacking the e5 pawn with two guys, and now knight d7. And from here, white can play for some pressure on the queen side. Maybe rook here. Maybe the queen can land on this square. Maybe a slight advantage for white. Not much, but something to to sort of nibble at the black position. But bishop d2 was played, and this allows black to at least keep control or contest the a file, whereas in the other variation white had control of the a file. Queen b1, getting ready to develop the queen on the b file, as we'll see, and then connect the rooks. So queen b4 here. Carlsen played his rook to e8. Okay, completely overprotecting this pawn, although we see overprotect when you put more defenders on than you need, but probably more likely opening up a square for the bishop or the knight to go to f8. Yeah, the bishop can contest this diagonal here, and the knight can in many cases jump into e6 and fly into some juicy squares. Here, computer doesn't like Caruana's next move, bishop to c3. And it seems whatever little advantage white had will soon evaporate. After b5, which was played by Carlsen, we have a trade of rooks. And Caruana goes for another trade of rooks. Well, doesn't want to concede the a file. But after queen to a7, he has to do just that. Bishop to c3. And now Carlsen jumps in with his queen to a2, targeting the c2 pawn. And here we have to be careful because, well, this might also be coming in. So Caruana doesn't take any chances. He goes queen b2. And this forces a queen trade more or less because, well, white has a big attack on e5 now. So Carlsen trades. And as we know, he doesn't mind these endgames. And now f6. So we have equal material, and this should be close to equal. Very hard to see anybody winning this, but Carlsen is a very well-known grinder. So let's see the next few moves. King to f1, king f7, the endgame. It's normal to develop your king in the endgame, bring it towards the center. You can do that because there are less pieces, and your king is not getting checkmated in the endgame. But remember, there are exceptions, but very rarely your king is getting checkmated in the middle of the board in an endgame. Knight to c5. This knight is jumping to e6. Very nice square. We're eyeing mostly f4, in some cases d4. Caruana decides to, well, prevent the knight jumping into f4, plays g3. And he can do that because g3 doesn't really damage his pawn structure in any way. Bishop f8. Carlsen wants a more active diagonal for this bishop. Knight to d2. And now knight g5. Okay, poking a little bit at the h-pawn, forcing it to move forward, but with every forward move you also can't go backward with the pawns, so you might leave some weaknesses, and Carlsen is hoping for that. After h4 he goes back, knight b3 and h5. And at this point it's clear that the chances belong to black. I mean, he has more space. We can simply look at the pawns. He has 3 pawns on the his own 4th rank, the 5th rank, and Caruana has only 2. So we can see that there's more space for maneuvering for black. And also with this h5 move, you have fixed a pawn here on a black square, which is on the same color complex as the bishops. So it could become a target. And let's see some more moves. Bishop d2, bishop d6. In some cases, black will also have the idea of pushing g5. Maybe not immediately, push g5. And if white takes, let's just play, okay, c3 was played in the game by Caruana. But let's just see as an example, if you play g5. And at some stage, if white does nothing, we can play bishop here and then maneuver a knight here. That's not a legal move. Knight here and knight here. And from here, we pressure this. And this will force white eventually to take here. And from here, black can create a passed pawn on the h file. This is sort of a standard technique in some endgames to create a passed pawn. So some things for white to worry about, but this should be holdable still. c5 by Carlsen, increasing his space advantage a little bit. Bishop to e3. And now Carlsen decides to, well, walk his king over towards the middle. King d1 and king d7. So perhaps entertaining some ideas of maybe getting into the white position at some stage. But king c2 seems to hold things down. And Carlsen goes for another plan of pushing now on the king side with f5. Caruana elects not to take. He plays king d1. If he takes, maybe he can start to worry now, because now we might start pushing, and either I will give you a weakness on g3 to attack, and if you take on f4, then you have this weakness fixed on a black square, remember. So all these little details can become significant. So king d1. So notice that Carlsen tries to put most of his pawns on the opposite color of his bishop, which gives him a slight advantage because the pawns on black squares could potentially, in some lines, become a target for his opponent. Okay, after king d1, Carlsen played f takes e4. f4 is an option. Probably a decent one, but compared to e takes f5, g takes f5, this weakness is not as significant, as it's not easy to attack this pawn. In the other line, we had changed one set of pawns, which had opened things up a little bit more. So Carlsen didn't go f4, he went with f takes e4, d takes e4, c4 pushing the knight, and now knight c5. And this is sort of the only way to pressure the white position. And this was the 39th move. And just like in game 1, Carlsen had the upper hand on the clock. So he wanted to force his opponent to make a decision in the time trouble. And the decision on the 40th move by Caruana was to take on c5. The pawn on f2 was attacked, so king e2. And still, this is slightly better for black. Why? Because he has the bishop against the knight. And the bishop is a long-range piece. It can operate on both sides of the board. So it gives black some slight chances to play for a win here. King c6. Again, like we mentioned, maybe entertaining some ideas of entering the position. But knight f1 here by Caruana. So they took some time here, and I'm sure Carlsen was trying to calculate if he could penetrate with his king. But in the end, he decided that he could not, and he played b4, which creates a passed pawn. But on the other hand, it's not a very dangerous passed pawn. After knight to e3, king to c5 was played. And now an instructive moment. Caruana plays f4. Carlsen trades. Bishop a5. And now forcing some trades with f5. And what's the big idea? After g takes f5, what did Caruana play here? Which forces a draw immediately. Caruana played knight takes c4. What? Giving up a piece? Yes, giving up a piece. But after king takes c4, e takes f5, a draw was immediately agreed. And if you want to learn more about why the draw was agreed, it's because of this h-pawn, which we call the wrong rook pawn. And it's because the queening square is of the opposite color of the bishop, so you can never protect it. So this is a dead draw. So I will leave a link to a pattern recognition video that I made called the wrong rook pawn. You can learn all about the drawing tendencies of wrong rook pawns. But these players, of course, knew all about that, and the game was agreed drawn here. But trust me, black will win these pawns and be left with, well, a bishop and an extra pawn, but that's not enough to win. So a draw was agreed. So game 3 in the books, yet another draw, but still the third game in a row where it's actually black who is pressing. So a little worrying for, well, for both sides, to be honest. But game 4 tomorrow. I'll see you then. Make sure to stay tuned for the solution to the puzzle from the last video and a new World Championship tactic puzzle. So see you in the next video.